What's up, bitches and bitchettes? Rob here. I'm doing my DIY today on the MR2 speedometer. This is an old car. It is a 93 with the electric speedometer, so you know it's freaking 20 years old. Capacitors dry out, the electrolytic style, so when they dry out they don't have quite the capacitance they used to, and the consequence is your speedometer is going to read wrong. Usually it doesn't work at all, or it reads too low, which is bad, especially when you're driving a car like an MR2. So I'm not going to teach you how to solder, but I will talk about the capacitors that you need and a easy way to go about getting everything apart, and some tips and tricks that I learned kind of along the way. First off, you will need your favorite beer. I recommend a Spot in anything. Odometer is wonderful beer. Careful, don't have too many of these or you won't be able to hold your soldering iron. So the first thing you got to do is you got to get this bitch apart, and it looks daunting. It's really not. The first thing that's going to have to happen is you need to get the white piece off the black piece. How is this done, you say? Well, it's fairly easy. You have these little tabs that you have to push in, but the problem is there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 of these little bastards. And because of that, it doesn't really make it very easy to take it apart. So to facilitate said process, I recommend you grab your handy dander feeler gauge, take the little set thing off of it, and just take the little feelers out. Unless you have something else that's very rigid and very friggin' thin like that, do not try to use your penis. So, what I'm going to do, really you only need probably 4 feelers, maybe 6 feelers if you're not too great at it. And what I'm going to do here, that is red if you're a total klutz. What I'm going to do here is push this guy in, and I'm going to stick this feeler in between him and the body, right? Like right here. So simple, just push it in. Might have to use something else. Careful, don't cut yourself. There you go. Okay, so you see that's just going to hold that little tab in. You know, and this goes the same for like all kinds of electronic shit that's put together with these little push tabs, where you can't figure like, how the hell do I get this thing apart? There's no screws or whatever. A lot of the times they make special tools that are kind of like little plastic crowbars that'll pull that stuff apart. But I digress. So back to the lecture at hand. So I'm just going to go around here, and I'm going to push these guys in. Okay. So, now that all of that is in there, all my little feeler gauges are sticking out. Spring, spring. Alright, I'll be able to separate this guy. So, it's going to take a little bit of squeeze, but not really a big deal. You can actually use this to help you just kind of push one side, push the other side. Makes horrendous noises, and your feeler gauges will start popping out. Careful as you separate it, you don't want to throw it across the room. It is unnecessary at this point to take the glass off the front. Just watch out for that odometer button. Put it up against my chest so I have a better control. Like I said, you still need to be careful here that you don't break shit. Oh, that sounded horrible, didn't it? That's actually just the whole thing popping apart. And my little feelers going all over the fucking place. Awesome. Alright, well anyway, here's our gauge cluster now. Ta-da! Bare naked to the world. Pick up my feeler gauges. Oh lordy, they're everywhere. Alright, so if you're one of those people that likes white face gauges, this is pretty much the same how-to. Actually, I'm going to do a lot of stuff in this how-to. I'm not going to do white face gauges. I honestly don't really see a lot of point in it. It's like a preference thing, I guess. So maybe some people feel they're a little bit easier to read, but anyway. So I need to get this bad boy out of here. And this goes for all the gauges. You're going to notice if you look at the gauges here, flip it directly over, and there's a few screws behind it. So this guy's got 1, 2, 3, 4 screws. Just carefully remove these screws. How do you carefully remove a screw? I don't know. Just turn it. Do not stab this trace board, because if you stab through something, chances are something's not going to be happy and not going to work. So don't do that. Be careful when they come up, because they like to grab onto the copper. So just kind of give it a little wiggle. The little washer likes to stick. You don't want to jack up that trace, because believe it or not, these actually supply, well, this one does. This supplies a ground plane. This supplies probably another ground plane. I don't know without looking at it, but they are part of the circuit, so okay. Now you don't see, but I'm holding the gauge with my other hand while I'm undoing that. So anyway, this gauge will now come out. Grab the corners. Carefully lift this guy up out of the pod. Ta-da! This is your speedometer. Alright, now, so I'm just going to cover this really quickly. I don't advocate this, obviously, for illegal purposes, like, you know, trying to pull one over on somebody you're selling your car to or something like this, but if you'll notice, my gauge reads only 795 miles. Now, why is this? Well, I cracked my odometer back, I cranked it back, as they say, because I wanted it to be more easy for me to keep track of service intervals and, you know, oil changes and all that kind of stuff. The car had 250,000 miles literally on it before I did this. I replaced every moving part on the car, so I think it's fairly fair. My odometer is also exempt on my title. It's an old ass car. I'm not trying to cheat anybody here, it's just for my own peace of mind. I plan on keeping the car for a really long time. I'm sure I'll probably wrap it around something and destroy the car before I would ever sell it. But who knows? But I will be upfront with that with people. Anyway, if you want to crack your speedometer back, it's actually really easy to do. So if you see back here, we'll flip it over on the top side, right? So you look in here, and there's this little metal bar right there that goes across this. All you have to do to crack it back is very carefully take a little pair of pliers, like a tiny little pair of pliers or something, and just grab this metal bar. It's a set bar. So just pull this back enough, and then you can actually come in here with a toothpick and just go and just wind it back to whatever number you want. Super easy to do. And once you get it to where you want it, just put the little bar back in here. So let's say if I were to replace my Speedo with a Speedo off of a car in a junkyard and I want to have the same odometer reading, that's what you would do, the same exact thing. So anyway, that's my speedometer crankback how-to. What we're actually here to do today is to replace the capacitors in this guy, like I said at the very beginning, because the speedometer has become grossly inaccurate. So you can see these speedometers, and I'll move my camera for you. The speedometers, the capacitors. So the capacitors are right here. If I can get some focus action going on here, let me do some zoom. Tends to work a little bit better. Focus. Focus. Huh. Well, anyway, this guy, the little black can with the silver top, this guy back in there, it's going to be a pain in the freaking dick to get to, but this guy, that's a capacitor, and this guy. Now it's super freaking critical that you get these in the right orientation. Note how this is the black side facing out. Noting it for myself. Around the other side of these bad boys, there's going to be a little stripe. Come on. See that little stripe there? So that's an indicator of polarity. That's negative. So we have to make sure that we get those in the right direction, or otherwise, as people say, the smoke comes out. So yeah, and then you probably are going to fry your Speedo. Get a nice little chip in there. It's probably a like frequency divider or something like that to convert those pulses into actually like a magnetic field. But the capacitors have to do with usually have to do with timer decay rates. So let's say you wanted to actually adjust your speedometer, right? Then that set of capacitors over there, probably that one resistor that you're seeing right or not seeing. This lighting is really difficult. That might have to be changed. Another typical thing with these electronic speedometers is if they actually stop working altogether, there's a little diode. So this guy right here, this little black cylinder, which is in the center of the camera right now, but you can't see where the damn. Anyway, that guy is a diode, so that can go bad too. If that happens, current doesn't know what the hell to do. There's a good possibility that your speedometer might not work at all from a speed perspective, but also from it may never work again because it kind of limits current and keeps it flowing in one proper direction. God, the focus really sucks on this camera. Let me wipe it off. How about now? Oh, that's not so bad. Still can't focus for the shit. It's because there's no light. There we go. Okay, so what I'm hoping is that my capacitors that I got are actually going to clear all that crap. It'll definitely clear that one. Those other ones I might have to tilt them a little bit, which is really no big deal. So, soldering 101, I'm not going to really try to do it. You need to do is just unsolder these guys. Watch out for those little surface mounted resistors right there. And that might be resistors or capacitors, I can't tell by looking at the camera, but I think those are resistors. So watch out for those. You don't want to heat those up, those will fry quick. Make sure that you don't spend any more time than you have to do in soldering this thing. So grab it from one side, pull on it as you're desoldering. I like to have a piece of copper solder wick handy, and you actually just hold it up against there and heat up the solder wick, and then that causes the solder to suck off of the board and go right into the solder wick. You can also use a piece of like lightly twisted up wire, just exposed stranded wire, to do the same thing, because solder likes to flow in the direction of where the heat is. So that's pretty much the rule of thumb there. I guess I should mention that besides from a bottle of your favorite beer and a soldering iron and some feelers, you're also going to need some capacitors for this little endeavor. So this little guy right here is the medium sized one. He's a 22 microfarad, looks like UF. It is rated at 25 volts. This tiny little bastard where the leads actually came out of when I was trying to desolder it. I guess I pulled a little too hard. Doesn't really fucking matter, it's going in the garbage. That's a 6.8 microfarad 25 volt. And this big mamma jamma, not really very big by capacitor standards, but this guy is a 25 volt 100 microfarad. So you can see his replacement is right here. It's actually considerably taller. Well, not all that much taller. It's like 11 millimeters, but he will work perfectly fine. It's not going to get in the way. I don't think any of the other ones will either. They are a little bit larger than their originals, as you can see here. I went ahead and just got a bag of them because they're so friggin' cheap. I share it with my buddies out on the MR2 community, but yeah. So we're gonna put these guys back in there. These I got are Nishikans. I got them from Mauser Electronics. They're Nishikan. They're rated at 10% loss, which is very good for a capacitor. So they should be really freaking accurate for a really long time. They're reduction of hazardous substances certified, so they don't have a bunch of nasty shit in them. Blah blah blah. Nobody cares about this stuff, but anyway. So there it is. We're gonna go and install them now. I know I said I wasn't going to do soldering 101, and I'm not, but for you guys that have never soldered this kind of stuff, maybe you only worked with wires and so forth, you're going to want to actually leave these leads long. You notice how they're bent? What I did, because there's a shallow location in there, I actually bent them at almost a 90-degree angle to get them to go into the holes. And then, it's pretty easy to feed them through. But what we're going to do to solder it, I've got this capacitor backed up against the board. And what you want to do, let me put my camera down. What you actually want to do to get these guys in here, you want to make sure that they stay seated, number one. I just knocked him loose. So you can see he's kind of crooked. Just hold your finger on the other side of it Alright, get it flat in there. The holes are already pre-drilled to accept the proper spacing on the leads, okay? So you just take the leads and bend them over a little bit. Okay, so like away from each other, you can see. You want to leave them long when you're soldering, okay? But bending them right up against that hole is going to hold this capacitor exactly where it needs to be. If I were to cut them short, things going to fall all over the damn place. Alright, now remember, to avoid a cold solder joint, which just translates to a really crappy solder joint that breaks free, which you really don't want because this is kind of a pain in the ass to get to, is you want to heat up the area a little bit before you put the solder in. You're not trying to heat the solder, you're trying to heat the component. The solder melts onto the component. See, I'm doing soldering 101. Anyway, you don't want to heat it up too much. It only takes a couple seconds because these motherfuckers are small. So you want to use a really fine solder. Don't get any big shit, any plumbing shit. Okay, you want, I don't know if you can see the size of this guy, but this is almost the same size as that wire on the capacitor, on the lead. Okay, so what I like to do, I don't bother tinning. You don't have to for these kinds of components. Alright, what you want to do is you just come in here. Alright, this is actually kind of cool because it's helping me see what the hell I'm doing. But you want to just come in here. Where's my solder? Hello. It's so weird working through a camera and not looking at it. You want to just come in there. Just touch it. 1, 2, 3. Don't get it too hot. A little bit of solder. Boom. You know, and then that's adequate. Because what you don't want to do is roast that capacitor, get it too hot, and then you end up with the same problems like it being 20 years old. That's it. Done. And then we can go and clip these obnoxiously long leads, of course. Alright, I'm going to go get the rest of them done. Have fun with that. Okay, so this is something I'm not incredibly proud of. The 22 microfarad capacitor, you see the brown underneath the lead right here? Apparently the trace actually came off the board a little bit, which sucks. So that means that it won't solder directly onto that trace. Well, as you can see, the trace, I don't know if you can see it or not actually, damn focus again. Anyway, the trace underneath that, there it is. The trace underneath it goes to that pin right there of that chip. So what I've essentially done is just soldered the lead of the capacitor, not only kind of half-assed to the trace that's floating, but also I just soldered it directly onto that chip pin. Be real careful when you do that. You want to have probably a little bit of solder on the tip of the soldering iron to melt the solder that exists on the chip pins, because you can fry a chip pretty easily if you get it too hot. I also find it fairly comical that those two pins of the chip were never soldered. Well, because there's nothing to solder them to. It looks like they might have gotten tinned just a little bit, but just kind of funny. Anyway. So that's that. Time for the last one now. I'll also point out that this capacitor gets to live at a kind of wonky angle because there's a bunch of crap above it that's in the way, which doesn't really matter. Just don't make sure that the you can see the leads are separate, which make sure that they don't ever touch each other, and also that that stripe, you know, is facing the right direction, which in this case is towards the odometer that way. Alright, so now for the last one, the 6.8. That should be a piece of cake. Alright, so because this didn't work out quite as smoothly as I'd anticipated, there's some kind of funkiness going on in the trace. Could be because it's just so old, you know, whatever. Maybe I'm a klutz, I don't fucking know. Point is, I got me old multimeter out, and I'm going to test these traces real quick. So, I mean, it's definitely better to know now whether something's jacked before you put it back together. There's a lot less effort involved in fixing it now than tearing it apart again. So I'm going to attempt to film this. This is kind of difficult. If I can I'll just use the video. Normally I use a jeweler's loop so I know exactly what I'm touching, but this video will work, I guess. So this guy to this guy should beep. Just touch the lead. And if it works out here, that means it's good. Alright, cool. And then this guy down here to that pin on the chip. Let's see if I can get it in frame. So this guy, solid, sweet. Okay, my first one went real smooth, so I'm not gonna bother testing him. This guy did this, good, and that one looks fine, but I'll test it anyway. What the hell? Going to the back side of the little surface mount. Alright. Talk about delicate. Good. Alright, so I got positive connection everywhere. Sweet. So, time to put it back together. Yeah, so installation is the reverse of removal. Now is a great time to do LED bulbs in your dash if you're going to do that. I think they look friggin' awesome. It's nice and clean, beautiful clean white LED. I'll show you the ones I used. I got mine directly from China. I bypassed all the BS. Just got them off of eBay. See these guys right here. You see that? I think they're like 1/68 or something like that. But it has chips all over these bastards. Like 4 in the end and like 4 on every side, and there's like 4 sides. There's like 20 LEDs, tiny little LED chips in one bulb. Puts out a really nice even light. So it's a great replacement. I totally highly recommend that. Yeah. Oh yeah, while I'm in here I need to check my temperature gauge because it's pegging to the friggin' H whenever I plug in the sensor, and the sensor's new and I couldn't find any wiring issues, so I think it's something in the gauge. They have testing procedures in the BGB, so just check that out if you got to do that. The tach actually had the same problem with the capacitors. I didn't think the speedometer had any problem, but the tach had the same issue. It wouldn't go above like 3200 RPM, so I had already fixed that one on a earlier date. So, all right, see you later.